I sit here today in a very awesome place, facing Sion, Yaakov Avinu, Mars Machpelah, and Hebron. Behind me is the Sion of Leah Imenu. Now, we've said many, many times in this shirim that Leah Imenu was the mother and the matriarch and the progenitor of all thankers for all generation. As the Gemara in Bracha says, Leah was the first one ever to thank Hashem. And as we explained many times, because she thanked Hashem for things which looked difficult. She was the first one ever to thank Hashem for things which looked bad. And the reason that Leah had such a difficult life, Chazal tell us that Pasuk tells us, in fact, V'yar Hashem ki snua Leah v'yiftach Yisrachma. And the question always bothered me. Yaakov Avinu, his face is printed, is engraved on Kisi HaKavod. So how could it be that Yaakov Avinu had hatred for Leah? V'yar Hashem ki snua Leah v'yiftach Yisrachma. Leah gained tremendously from that sinner. She thanked Hashem for it. Because of that sinner, because of that hatred, she was zeiche to be maimed to bring about half of the Shvatim, half of the population of the tribes of Klal Yisrael. But how could it be that Yaakov Avinu was so great, so perfect? Midas HaTiferes, the sphere of Tiferes. Yaakov Avinu was the Merkava for the Midas HaTiferes. Titain Emes Yaakov. He was the paradigm, the ultimate surah, the ultimate example, the quintessential man of truth and greatness. How could it be that he had hatred? This is one of the worst things that you could have because of this midah of sinas chinam that we are still enjoying the long gullus today. How could it be that Yaakov Avinu had within his heart this attribute? So Chazal teach us a fascinating idea here, is that when Yaakov Avinu married Rachel, so Lavan Haramai, who's called Lavan Arami. Shalom Shvadron explains Arami is reflective in Aramaic, means the one who fooled himself. He convinced himself that he was L'Shem Shemayim, as so many people do, and he made a wedding of his older daughter. Instead of marrying off his younger daughter Rachel, he married his older daughter Leah. And he convinced himself that it was the right thing to do, as he in fact confronts Yaakov afterwards. Losa came from Komena. We don't marry off the younger daughter before the older daughter. First marry the older daughter. You first married the older daughter, now afterwards you can marry the younger daughter. So that night, the lighting at this chasna was very, very poor. Lovin ensured that there would be almost no light at the wedding, in order that he should make sure that Yaakov would be tricked into marrying Leah. And Yaakov was convinced 100% that he was marrying Rachel and not Leah. And he wakes up in the morning after thinking the whole night that he had just married Rachel, and he finds Leah, and he's shocked out of his mind. Can you imagine this? After working 7 years to marry Rachel, Yaakov understood that the primary Shvatim he was supposed to bring about through Rachel, 7 years of his life, after spending 14 years preparing in the yeshiva of Shem Be'aver. 14 years of his life, and then another 7 years of his life working to marry Rachel. 21 years in total. And then he wakes up in the morning, and instead of Rachel, he finds Leah. What a shock this was to Yaakov. So what's Yaakov's response to Leah? He says, I don't understand. I was supposed to marry Rachel. How come I'm talking now to Leah? So Leah makes a very, very sharp comment, which is totally true. We're going to investigate this a little bit, and now we'll understand a little better why Yaakov had pain in his heart with his relationship to Leah. Leah says, you are like a book that has no students. You're like a sefer she'ein lo talmidim. Right? The Medrash explains, Medrash Rabbah, Parsha Vayetzim, Parsha Ayin. The Medrash says, you're like a book which has no students. Right? Didn't you, in fact, when your father asked you, are you Yaakov? Are you Esav? Didn't you, in fact, say that Esav B'Karecha? Didn't you answer in the affirmative? Right? And This we know was the most painful moment in Yaakov Avinu's life. Yaakov is Midas Emes, Tiferes, Titan Emes Yaakov, and as Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky explains, that each of the avos had to be tested in their opposite attributes. Avraham Avinu was tested in the midah of Hura. He had to try and shech Yitzchak. Yitzchak Avinu was tested in the midah of Chesed. Gemara in Shabbos says when the Jewish people were in a state of Gzera, and there was a Gzera against Klal Yisrael, then Yitzchak had to come in and defend them, and he was the only one who defended them. And Yaakov's midah was Emes, Titan Emes Yaakov, and he had to lie his way, had to alter the truth to Yitzchak, and tell him Anochi Esav B'charecha. Rashi tells us it wasn't a lie; it was Gnei Disdas. He said Anochi, I am. He was being Ramas. He was hinting to the Yisrael Esav B'charecha. In any event, this was the most painful moment of Yaakov Avinu's life. And now at this critical moment, after 21 years of working to marry Rachel, Leah tells him, you're like a book without students because I learned this from you. This was an incredibly painful statement. Although it was true, it was an incredibly painful statement for Yaakov Avinu to hear. Chazal tell us because of this statement that Yaakov felt sina, he felt pain towards Leah. He felt hate. It's hard for me to say the word, but he felt hatred towards Leah. Now, we cannot say anything about the Avos Limos. They're on a totally different plane than us, the Avos Limos. But we can suggest the following idea because we are meant to learn from this parsha. What Leah said was completely accurate and it was completely true. It's for sure. Yeah, Hashem works mida keneged mida. It's for sure because Yaakov Avinu had to say, Anochi Esav B'charecha, that this incident transpired to him. Whatever we do down here, it comes up and it gets sent back down. Now, Yaakov Avinu had no choice in this matter. He tried to get out of it. He did not want to lie at any cost to Yitzchak Avinu. In fact, Yaakov Kamenetsky says, pain, Timsheni Avi Vahiti Be'enav Kemitatea. The Torah tells us. The word pain means I want to be touched. He wanted to be caught, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, so it wouldn't be a lie. He wanted, in fact, to be caught by Yitzchak Avinu, so it wouldn't be a lie. But his prayers were not answered, and he had to lie. It was the most painful moment of Yaakov Avinu's life. Yaakov's entire life was truth. And now he's confronted by Leah Imenu that I learned from this. I learned this from you. Now, what Leah said was completely true. Right? And Leah, her whole life, she was suffering. And, of course, it was difficult that she was now being confronted after being thought to be Rachel and now Leah. It was an incredibly difficult moment for these two great individuals. But and I will humbly suggest this as I stand before the kever of Leah, and I hope in Hashem's infinite mercy that she will accept these words I'm going to say. Again, there's not even one iota of any even hint of criticism towards Leah. But had Leah remained silent and said, I'm sorry, I apologize, you're right. I did this only because my father forced me into this. You know my father was a complete Ramai, Laban Harami. I was forced into this. I apologize. I'm broken down crying in front of her husbands. Perhaps it's very likely that Yaakov Avinu would have acquiesced and said, Leah, I appreciate this. I was employee for your father for 7 years. He's a complete Ramai. You were forced into it. And perhaps the relationship afterward would have been different. Yet Leah chose to go with the path of strict truth, that she had learned this from Yaakov Avinu. Right? She, as it were, put back into his domain this painful incident. Because of that, she was hated for all life. Now, again, Hashem puts thoughts into her head. Everything that happened is divinely inspired. It happened from a Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? Had Leah not been hated all her life, she wouldn't have been Zocha right away, perhaps, to have children. And she wouldn't have taught us for all generations that the proper way to thank Hashem is thank Hashem when things look bad. This had to happen. Leah had to say these words. They were put into her head. and she had to be hated by Yaakov for her entire life. And for that reason, she became the progenitor, the quintessential woman of truth for all generations, for the Jewish people, truth and thankfulness, thanking Hashem when things look bad. But we can learn one thing from this, that when a husband says something, you have a true answer. When a spouse, it applies to the wife also, when a spouse says something, you have a true answer, and you have a choice between saying the truth and being apologizing. Apologize. Don't say the truth. The truth is too painful. The truth hurts. Most people, even Yaakov Avinu, to hear the truth, it was much, much too painful. It was much, much too sore. Right? We live in a world of transparency, so to speak. People love telling the truth, even when it's painful, right? And we should know it's coming from the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara in these situations does not want to tell the truth, but you're going to hurt somebody else. This is called onos tvarim, right? Even though this was divinely inspired and can hurt somebody else with words, and this was the most hurtful thing that someone could have ever said. So now, as I apologize profusely and I prostrate myself down before the kever of Rachel and Leah, I close with this idea of please, when your spouse says something and you have a true answer, and it could be completely true, but please don't say the truth. Please apologize. Please humble yourself. Please realize that humility and hachnoah, apologizing and humbling yourself and crying and saying, I'm so sorry. You're right. Had Leah done that, perhaps it would have been different. It wasn't possible. She had to do this. It had to happen. The thought was put in her head because it was because of this hatred that Yaakov had for Rachel that half of the Shvatim came about. But it was taught for us for all generations that this is the way we should act. We should learn from these midrashim, from Chazal, Parshas Vayetze, Medrash Rabbah, Parshas Vayetze. It also appears in the Das Kanim, in Chavtes, Chafei, and Bereshis. And we should learn from this that this is the way a Jew is meant to act. Be apologetic, humble yourself to other Jews. Don't say the truth even when you know it. You know it's absolute truth that this is why it happened. Hashem should help us in His infinite mercy to always act in the proper way to our spouses and everyone else. Amen.